Dusty Creek had always been a quiet town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and life moved at the slow rhythm of the horses and the wind over the desert plains. Wooden saloons lined the main street, their swinging doors creaking in the occasional gust, and the general store's bell rang only when a customer ventured out from the neighboring ranches. Children played near the water troughs, and old-timers leaned against fences, swapping stories of the past. But all that peace had begun to unravel. It started with strange happenings, livestock disappearing overnight, stagecoaches being held up by masked riders, and cryptic symbols etched into barn doors. At first, people whispered about wild animals, but when a young farmhand vanished from his cabin, panic began to creep through the town like a slow-moving storm. Mothers pulled children close, and men stayed awake at night, rifles in hand, listening to the wind's eerie sigh. The stories were impossible to ignore. People spoke in hushed tones of Red Shadow, the infamous outlaw who had vanished 10 years ago after a string of robberies and daring escapes that had made him a legend. Some swore he had been killed, others believed he had disappeared into the desert to avoid capture. But now, his ghost, or whoever dared to claim his name, seemed to have returned. Ethan Blake, a retired sheriff with a steady gaze and a reputation for being fearless in his prime, watched the town's panic with a mixture of concern and frustration. He had solved countless crimes in his years, tracking outlaws through canyons, rivers, and deserts, but something about these incidents felt different. Too precise, too deliberate. The symbols left behind weren't random, they were a message, a trail meant to be followed by those who knew how to read them. Clara James, a bold and determined rancher, rode into Dusty Creek one late afternoon, her horse kicking up clouds of dust as she approached the saloon. Her brother's horse had been stolen during the latest wave of attacks, and she refused to stand idly by. Word of Ethan's past heroics had reached her ears, and she sought him out immediately. "Sheriff Blake," she said, her voice firm yet edged with desperation, "I need your help. Whoever's behind this is no ordinary thief, they know the land, the people, maybe even you." Ethan studied her for a moment, noting her confidence and grit. He knew the terrain, he knew the dangers, and he could see the fire in her eyes. Together, they made a plan. Their first step would be the old abandoned mine at the edge of Red Rock Canyon, the place where Red Shadow had been last seen before disappearing. If the outlaw, or whatever had returned, was behind these attacks, that mine would hold the first clues. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the town in shadows that seemed to grow longer with every passing second, Ethan and Clara mounted their horses. The wind whispered through the streets, carrying with it the promise of danger and the thrill of a chase. The legend of Red Shadow was awakening, and Dusty Creek was about to learn that some ghosts never truly die. The sun hung low over the jagged cliffs of Red Rock Canyon, casting long, twisting shadows across the dusty terrain. Ethan Blake and Clara James rode in silence, the only sound the rhythm of hooves pounding against the rocky ground. Every so often, the wind carried a distant whistle or the sharp cry of a hawk circling overhead, but otherwise, the canyon seemed empty, eerily quiet, almost too quiet. Yet both Ethan and Clara knew better. This place had a reputation, whispered in Dusty Creek for years. It was where Red Shadow once vanished, and it was rumored to be a trap-filled labyrinth for anyone foolish enough to wander too deep. Clara adjusted the reins of her horse, eyes scanning the narrow canyon paths ahead. "Something doesn't feel right," she muttered, her hand resting lightly on her rifle. Ethan nodded, sensing the same tension, his weathered eyes scanning the cliffs for movement, for any hint of the outlaw they sought. Suddenly, a cloud of dust erupted from a side canyon. Masked riders appeared, riding with uncanny precision and speed, cutting off their path. Clara's heart pounded. "Ambush!" she shouted, pulling her rifle up as the first shot rang out. Bullets ricocheted off the canyon walls, and Ethan spurred his horse into a sharp turn, narrowly dodging a hail of gunfire. The chase began in earnest. Ethan and Clara raced through the narrow passages, ducking under low rock overhangs and leaping across jagged outcroppings. The masked attackers seemed to know the canyon intimately, cutting off exits and appearing suddenly from hidden crevices. The wind whipped around them, carrying dust and gunpowder, making the world a chaotic swirl of brown and red. Amid the chaos, Clara spotted a symbol carved into the cliff face, a crude arrow pointing toward a hidden crevice. "Ethan, there! That's our clue," she shouted over the roar of the chase. Ethan understood immediately. If the ambushers knew the terrain this well, then whoever had sent them was leading them somewhere, but where? Using the cover of a narrow canyon bend, Ethan and Clara executed a daring maneuver. They split momentarily, riding in opposite directions to confuse their attackers. Bullets whizzed past, kicking up dust and rock, but neither of them faltered. As the last masked rider chased Clara down a path that led to a dead-end cliff, she reined in her horse sharply, forcing him to swerve and tumble down into a narrow ravine below. Ethan, seeing Clara's quick thinking, used the opportunity to trap the remaining attackers between two canyon walls. In the end, all they found was a pile of discarded masks and weapons, empty, abandoned, yet enough evidence to prove that Red Shadow's presence was no longer just a rumor. Someone was orchestrating these attacks, and they were clever, ruthless, and always one step ahead. Breathing heavily, they regrouped at the edge of the canyon, watching as shadows lengthened with the setting sun. The symbols on the walls hinted at a hidden hideout deeper in the cliffs, and though the ambush had been dangerous, it had also led them to their next clue. Ethan and Clara exchanged a knowing glance. The real challenge was only beginning, and Red Shadow's ghost would not reveal itself easily. The entrance to the abandoned mine yawned like a dark mouth at the edge of Red Rock Canyon. Ethan Blake dismounted cautiously, his boots crunching on loose gravel, while Clara James followed, her rifle slung over her shoulder, eyes sharp for any sign of danger. The canyon behind them stretched into shadows, the last rays of sunlight flickering over jagged cliffs. Silence had returned, but it was the kind of silence that promised hidden threats. "Stay close," Ethan whispered. "If Red Shadow, or whoever set this up, is in here, we don't want to be caught off guard." The mine smelled of damp earth, old smoke, and decay. Stalactites hung like jagged teeth, and the wooden beams supporting the tunnels groaned under their own age. Clara's lantern illuminated the walls, revealing old mining carts overturned, rusted tools scattered on the floor, and symbols etched into the wood, symbols that matched the ones they had seen in the canyon. "This is it," Clara murmured, tracing a symbol with her gloved finger. "This is where he's been hiding, or where he wants us to find something." They moved cautiously, the air thick with anticipation. As they delved deeper, they discovered journals stacked in a hidden nook, brittle and yellowed with age. Ethan carefully opened one, dust curling in the lantern light. The entries were in Red Shadow's hand, chronicling his years of hiding, the betrayals he had suffered, and the reason for his vanishing. The corrupt town officials had stolen from him and his family, forcing him into the shadows. There was also mention of a hidden cache of gold, buried deep within the canyon, guarded by traps only someone familiar with the terrain could navigate. "This explains everything," Ethan said, reading aloud. "The attacks, the symbols, the disappearances, he's trying to lead us here, but why?" A sudden crack echoed through the mine. The floor beneath them shuddered, and a pile of rocks tumbled near their feet. Clara spun, raising her rifle instinctively. "Trap," she breathed. "He's still here. He's watching us." Ethan nodded. "Careful. He doesn't want to kill us, not yet. He wants to see if we're smart enough to follow the clues." Navigating the tunnels became a tense game of wits. Boards creaked ominously, loose rocks threatened to tumble, and every shadow seemed to flicker with a hidden presence. At one narrow passage, Ethan nearly triggered a tripwire, a mechanism meant to collapse part of the tunnel on intruders. Clara caught him just in time, and together they stepped carefully, avoiding the deadly traps that Red Shadow had left behind to protect his secrets. Finally, at the heart of the mine, they found a larger chamber, hidden behind a false wall. Inside lay remnants of old mining equipment, bags of supplies, and more journals detailing escape routes and secret locations. One passageway, marked with the same cryptic arrow they had seen in the canyon, led deeper into the cliffs, a route that promised the final confrontation, the showdown that would reveal whether Red Shadow was friend or foe, legend or ghost. Ethan looked at Clara, determination in his eyes. The answers we're looking for, they're ahead. But this isn't just about treasure. It's about justice. Clara nodded, tightening her grip on the rifle. The mine was only the beginning. Whatever awaited them beyond this point would test their courage, their skill, and their understanding of the legend that haunted Red Rock Canyon. And as the shadows of the mine stretched long and dark, they realized the ghost of Red Shadow was closer than they had ever imagined. The wind howled through the empty streets of the ghost town, carrying the scent of dust, decay, and something older, revenge. Broken saloon doors swung on rusted hinges, and the faint light of the setting sun painted the wooden facades in fiery orange and deep crimson. Ethan Blake and Clara James rode cautiously along the main street, their horses' hooves echoing in the silence. Every step felt like walking into a trap, yet there was no turning back now. From the shadow of the old general store, a figure emerged, tall, imposing, and unmistakable. Red Shadow. Time had carved lines into his face, and battle scars ran across his hands and arms, but his presence radiated a ghostly menace. He moved with the precision of a predator, every step measured, every movement deliberate. Ethan Blake, the outlaw's voice cut through the wind, low and menacing. I wondered if you'd follow the trail. Ethan's hand instinctively hovered over his revolver. Red Shadow, he said evenly, it ends tonight. No more raids, no more fear. Clara stepped forward, her eyes sharp, rifle ready. And I'm not letting anyone leave this town with blood on their hands. For a moment, the three of them faced each other in tense silence. Then Red Shadow drew his gun, a shadowy blur in the fading sun. The first shot cracked the stillness, echoing across the deserted town. Ethan ducked behind a toppled barrel, returning fire as Red Shadow disappeared behind an old water tower. Clara crouched behind the broken steps of the saloon, taking careful aim at anyone who moved too fast. The duel unfolded like a deadly dance. Ethan and Red Shadow circled each other, gunfire sparking against wood and stone. Clara navigated the traps Red Shadow had set, loose floorboards, rigged barrels, and pitfalls hidden in the dust. Each shot carried tension, each step felt like fate deciding who would survive. The ghost town seemed to come alive around them, every shadow hiding a secret, every creaking door a threat. Finally, Ethan's careful shot grazed Red Shadow's shoulder. But instead of pressing the advantage, the outlaw lowered his gun and raised a hand. I'm not your enemy tonight, he said, breathing heavily. I'm here for justice, for the betrayal my family suffered. The town's officials stole from us, and this gold, it's proof. I only want the truth revealed. Ethan studied him, gun still raised but hesitant. Clara's rifle remained steady, yet her gaze softened as she saw the pain and resolve in Red Shadow's eyes. Slowly, tension eased. An uneasy truce formed among the three. They agreed to work together, planning to expose the corrupt officials and ensure the treasure led to justice rather than greed. As the sun sank beneath the horizon, the ghost town's shadows stretched long and ominous. The wind whispered through broken windows and empty streets, carrying secrets of the past and promises of a reckoning. Though the duel had ended, the legend of Red Shadow remained alive, etched into the cliffs of Red Rock Canyon. Ethan looked at Clara, and she nodded silently. The battle was over, but the story, the justice, and the legacy of Red Shadow were just beginning.